Today with us, we've got Jeff McMullen, who's an associate professor at the University of Indiana.
Indiana University.
Excuse me, Indiana University, located in Bloomington, Indiana. And Jeff is really an expert on a lot of things related to entrepreneurship. But one area that he's gotten extremely interested in the last few years is what he calls developmental entrepreneurship. So that's what we're going to be talking with him today about. So just start, Jeff, what is developmental entrepreneurship?
Developmental entrepreneurship is intentional agency to change institutions. So if entrepreneurship is intentional change, which is, we define entrepreneurship a lot of different ways. Some people define it as new venture creation, some people define it as innovation. If you look at the way it's being used recently, or more commonly now, it's intentional change. It's making an individual difference to change a system in some way. So development becomes your adjective. What are we changing here? We're doing this for some reason, this intentional change to develop the system. In this case, that's done through institution. So we're largely looking at what kind of institutions can an entrepreneur change to make business easier so that the economy can develop or a nation can develop, and what would that look like? So when we talk about institutions, should I?
Well, that was the question I was about to ask. What's an institution?
Institutions define so many different ways, and I'm not going to try to convince you of a particular, let's just throw out a working definition, right? So you have formal institutions like Doug North talks about, which are laws, regulations, and you have informal institutions, which are norms, beliefs, values that we typically hold. Inside those formal institutions, a lot of times what we're talking about when we talk about capitalism, we're talking about rule of law versus rule of man, or anarchy. So it's a system where there's an objective set of rules and nobody's supposedly above that, they apply to everyone. Competitive markets, however you want to refer to that, but that's the idea that it is a free market, but it's also, there's competition in that market, so it's not laden with monopoly. Property rights that are well defined. By the way, it does no good to have property rights if they're not supported, if they're not defended by, if they're not embedded in a rule of law, because I can have rights all day. It's like having the right to vote. If somebody has a machine gun there, it doesn't really matter. You can have the right, but I don't have the ability to exercise it. Right? Same thing with property rights. They're only good if I have the property right, if I can sell that property right, if it's protected. For example, like we were talking about earlier with title, that if I have property, it's one thing. If I have the property right, because I have the title, then I can use that property for a lot of things. I can sell the property, or I could sell the right to the property so I can live in the property, but I get credit. That's a property rights regime. So and then the last one would be incentives for entrepreneurship and innovation. So when we talk about institutions, people seek profit. William Baumol talks about that. How? Usually the most efficient way, right? So if the most efficient way is through politics, then you might see a lot of that kind of, not destructive, but undestructive entrepreneurship. It doesn't really create any value, it just kind of redistributes it. When we talk about incentives for entrepreneurship and innovation, we're talking about people seeking to get ahead by creating new things, new products, new services, ones that are better and lift others up, not just themselves. I'm not just profiting at another's expense. So how does entrepreneurship kind of play into those? Entrepreneurs can reform each of those institutions by looking for inefficiencies in those, pooling together lots of those inefficiencies into a business that can make a profit.
Okay, you've worked a great deal recently in Nigeria and Ghana. Could you give us an example of institutional issues? And
yeah, in that case, I think this is an interesting question with water. Water is both a public good, so people feel kind of an entitlement to water at a very low price, and then it's also we pay for it regularly. Whether it's bottled water in the United States, whether it's a sachet plastic bag. But what I found really interesting in some of the work I was doing with Coca-Cola and Guinness over there was that what I thought would be a cost issue, why people wouldn't buy Water Health International Water, which is World Health Organization level quality, it was selling, but it wasn't selling as much as they would think. And you were getting a 20-liter thing of it, and it was better than the tap water even, and much better than the water coming out of a borehole pipe that was coming out of the aquifer, which was raw water, untreated. Yet people would spend more than they were spending on this 20-liter vat for a plastic sachet bag of water, which was basically tap water. And so that became an interesting question. So it wasn't necessarily about the ability, how much am I spending on the water, it's why would I be willing to spend as much on a sachet bag as I would spend on a 20-liter vat. And this gets into assumptions, I think ridiculous assumptions that people make, especially in development. I think people come in and think they're somehow smarter than the people that they're helping. Which drives me crazy, that paternalistic notion. In this case, there were reasons. If you talk to people, get out on the floor, they say, look, I can't carry this 20-liter bag, it's not cold, this bag was cold, I don't know, that's exposed, it's open, I don't know about the quality of that, this is branded. And it was a branding issue, it was a perceptual map. Where do I put this water? This seems like bath water, this is drinking water. They're both water, right? And they're both of equal quality, but how they're packaged, what they're used for, there was a lot of work to be done on how are you going to market this product. So Water Health came up with the idea of doctor water, so that they could brand the water. I know, I can't say it was a sexy name necessarily, but the idea was to show it's not just water coming out of the tap. It was special, it was in this category over here, the sachet category. And so that was the challenge that they were running into, is how do we approach this just like you would in the United States? You're marketing soda, how do you approach it that way so that people want the product that you're selling? And it's good for them, yes, but that's not enough, right? It's desirable in some way. It has an aesthetic appeal as well, and so that was an example of entrepreneurship going in, building these businesses. The product itself was good for the community, so you'd see development there. And there was a hurdle here, that it wasn't being quickly adopted. Functionally, it should have been. If you asked an engineer, they would have said that should just be instantly consumed, preferred over the other, because it had neglected the idea.
And coming from outside of Ghana, it's something that you would have never thought of, right?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think you go into any situation with presuppositions on why people do what they do. And even when you ask people, they'll tell you, well, it's just too expensive. And that was the first response you'd get. And then you'd walk around, observe people, and watch what they do, right? And you'd walk through the entire community, you'd spend time with people, and you'd ask them, you'd see somebody buying a sachet bag, and you'd ask them why they're buying it. If you just listen to that first response, then you're going to walk away going, well, it's just expensive. In some instances, that's true. In Nigeria, that was the case. There was one source of water. It was 40% of your income. What are you going to do? You got to have water. That was the
Okay, why weren't there two sources of water?
It's a good question. I don't know. I wasn't there long enough to find out why only one truck and why isn't another truck coming in. I don't know if all I could do is speculate, and let's just say maybe the companies don't play aren't friendly, don't play fair or whatever. But there was one source of water in that particular community, and they were a little ways away from the coast and from the municipal supply.
Okay. Well, thank you.